All right. So in line 6, it says, "Remember, O Lord, your tender mercies and your loving kindnesses, for they have been from of old. Do not remember the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions. According to your mercy, remember me, for your goodness' sake, O Lord." And so remember that sins are disobedience of God's law. Transgressions are a violation of God's law. All right, so sin is disobedience of God's law, and transgression is a violation of God's law. And so David is saying that, do not, in line 7, do not remember the sins of my youth. Do not remember the disobedience of your law of my youth, nor my transgressions or my violation of your law. All right. And so what laws that he sinned against, and what laws did he transgress in? Let's take a look into 2 Samuel 24:10. 2 Samuel 24:10. And remember, I am reading from the New King James Version. 2 24:10. All right. So now this right here talks about the census and the plague. All right. And so what happened is God had, and this was after David had sinned with Bathsheba. And this was also after when all those sins and stuff started happening, the consequences of those sins started happening to David, with the incest, with the but his son wanted to overthrow him and all of that. So it was a lot of things that had gone on from that adulterous sin. But for this one, what is referring to when he's talking about the sins of his youth, so what did he do? Well, in verse 1 of 2 Samuel 24, and starting with verse 1, I know I said 10, but let's look at verse 1. It says, "Again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, go number Israel and Judah." Now, so that means to take a census of. Well, we already know that God really doesn't like for us to number things. He really doesn't. He doesn't work in numbers. He works in smallness, and because he doesn't need a whole bunch of people to do anything. You know, that's why it's just a small number of people. He used smallness to do great things, because he's the one who performs the miracles and the work and everything like that. And then so, and the reason why he works with smallness and uses on a handful of people is because, you know, so no one can get the glory but him. All right. And not to say, oh, well, we had 10 million people and we defeated such and such. No, even if you had 10 million people, if God is not on your side, you won't be able to defeat them. Okay, so he told him to take, he moved David against them now, not for them, against them, to go and take a census. All right, so remember, I mean, they really didn't have to take a census, because God had already told them to be what? Fruitful and multiply, and restore the earth, or replenish the earth. And so what happened is, so he sent Joab, the commander of the army, to go and everything. And so Joab kind of questioned it, because like, why you want me to go do this? Because he kind of knew that it wasn't right to in the first place. So, but anyway, so he did, and he went all over and numbered the people and whatnot. And so here it is. So Joab gave the sum of the number of the people to the king, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. All right. And that's going to be a little shady, because if we read in, let me see if I, First Chronicles 21, see what it gives, 21:5. All right, so it Chronicles lists some of the same things that happened in Samuel and Kings, all right, because it's a chronicle. All right, so look at what the accounting in First Chronicles says. It says, then Joab gave some of the number of the people to David. All Israel had 1,100,000 men who drew the sword. Now we just said, Joab said that it had what, 800,000 men that drew the sword, right? Now in First Chronicles 21, it says that 1,100,000 men who drew the sword. So he was what, 300,000 men short. Then he said that and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. Chronicle lists as Judah had 400,000 men. 470,000 men who drew the sword. So he gave them 30,000 more men. All right, because it says 500,000, right? And Joab said, and Chronicles says 470,000 men who drew the sword. But check this out in verse 6. But he did not count Levi and Benjamin among them, for the king's word was abominable to Joab. All right, so it was abominable to him because he didn't want to do that. All right, so he didn't count two of the tribes. And we're going to stop right there, and we'll pick it up in the next segment.